What's up guys, Perry from Rockville here, and today we're going to be going over the wires, inputs, and outputs on the ATV300. So at the end of the amplifier, you'll see this wire harness here, and this has everything we need to power the amplifier, connect it to our subwoofer and our music source like our head unit. So to break it down, we'll start with these wires here, and we can use these to power the amplifier. So we got the 12-volt wire here that runs to the battery of your vehicle. The remote wire can run to the ignition or accessory switch of your vehicle, and you can run the ground wire to the metal chassis of your vehicle. So after you've made all those connections, your amplifier will power on so that you can use it with your setup. From there, you can use these speaker wires to connect the subwoofer to your amp. So this white wire acts as the positive wire to connect to the positive terminal of your sub. And then you have the black and white wire, which is the negative wire to go to the negative terminal of your sub. Now to connect the amp to your music source like a head unit, we have these RCA inputs here. So if your head unit has an RCA sub output, you can take an RCA cable and plug one end to that output, then plug the other end into these RCA inputs here. If your head unit doesn't have RCA outputs, but instead has high level outputs, you can use these adapters here. So you can take the wired end of these adapters and plug them to your high level output wires. Then plug the other end into the RCA input on the amp. You can also use the other ends of these wires and daisy chain them off the speakers of your vehicle to run to the RCA inputs of your amplifier. Just as long as the signal is running from the speakers to these wires and to the amplifier, you'll be good to go. The last thing on this harness is the bass remote input, so we can connect our bass remote knob to control the level of the amplifier from the front of our vehicle. So to set this up, you're going to take the bass remote knob itself and the bass remote wire here, plug one end into the back of the bass remote knob, then plug the other end into the bass remote input on the amp. From there, you can use the bass remote knob to control the level of your sub that's connected to your amplifier. Now, if your head unit doesn't have RCA outputs, you can use these high level adapters here. So if you need to use these, you can take the wires at the end of these adapters and run them into the positive and negative output wires on the back of your head unit, then plug the other end into the RCA inputs of your amplifier. And while these are running to the speaker wire outputs on the back of your head unit, you can also parallel wire your full range speakers in your vehicle. If you're using these wires, you'll also want to flip the input voltage switch on the top of your amplifier to high. On the top of the amplifier, we have a bunch of controls to adjust the sound of your subwoofer. And to get to those controls, you're gonna look for these screws here. Then you can take a Phillips head screwdriver to take these out. Then you'll want to take this plate removal tool, line it up to the edges of the plate, and use it to lift the plate off of the amp. So let's take a look at these controls, starting with the phase knob here. You can use this to set the phase of your amplifier from 0 to 180 degrees, and you would just want to use this to sync the amplifier to the rest of your setup. So for example, if you feel like the subwoofer that's connected to the amplifier is pushing in music instead of pushing it out, you would just want to use the phase switch here so that it syncs up to the rest of your setup. Next, we have the bass boost knob, so we can give our subwoofer some extra bass. And you can set this anywhere from 0 to 12 dB, depending on how much bass you want. Next, we have the subsonic and frequency knobs, and we can use this to set the frequency range of our subwoofer. So we can use the frequency knob to set the low-end frequencies we hear coming out of the subwoofer. So for example, if I set this to 50 Hertz, we'll be hearing everything from 50 Hertz and above and nothing below. And then we can use the subsonic knob to set the high pass filter of the amplifier. So if I set this to about 100 Hertz, we'll only be hearing 100 Hertz and below and nothing above. So again, you'll want to set these together so that you hear the frequency range that you want out of your subwoofer. If the enclosure of the sub that you're using is ported, you'll want to set the subsonic filter to the tuning frequency of the box your sub is in. And to find the tuning frequency, you can check the manual of the sub that you're using. Next, we have the level knob to set the volume of our subwoofer. And after that, we have the input voltage switch. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're using the high level adapters with your amplifier, you'll want to set this to high. And if you're using the RCA outputs of your head unit to connect to the amplifier, you can set this switch to low. So hopefully this helped explain all of the wires, inputs, and outputs for your ATV300. But of course, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to our customer support team through phone or email. As always, I'm Perry from Rockville, and we'll see you guys next time.